Thank you for having me.
Of course. So if you just want to start telling us a little bit about your family history
Okay.
here in Fort Lupton.
Well, I was born on Putnam's Farm in Fort Lupton, which is just a little farm just outside, south of Fort Lupton. And my father and mother were agricultural workers. They worked out in the fields, and so we lived on different farms. There was a lot of agriculture in this area, lots of, we had, I think at one time, 3 canning factories. Kuner's was one, which no longer exists, and then the Fort Lupton Canning. And then there was a potato dock. I believe there was an onion dock, but I'm not positive. So our lives revolved around, agriculture, and that, that's how everybody made their living there. We had a strong workforce that would move up every spring. There was a labor camp built precisely to accommodate the farm laborers that came in seasonally. The camp itself had some permanent homes where people lived there year-round and had those homes for many, many years. My husband lived in house number 1, was one of the first ones. And they had lots of land behind the houses so that they had these big gardens if they wanted to raise their own produce. They also had a center where the priest came to give Mass on Sunday mornings. They also had it was the community center, so they could have dances there at one time or another. I don't know too much about those particular dances. They had a playground so the children could go. My cousins grew up in one of those houses, and so when we went over to visit them, we had our own playground equipment to play on. So anyway, this was an agricultural community. Consequently, we had a large section that came in, so the labor camp filled up. My father was a musician, and he built a dance hall that is just north of the town, and he called it the Gardenia Hall because my mother loved gardenias. So as a musician then, he played, every Sunday for I don't know how many years, until his death. They played every Sunday, particularly the summer, and not so much in the winter. But in the summer, that dance hall, the Gardenia Hall, was packed, just absolutely packed with people who came. And they came from all over. They weren't just the migrant workers that came from Texas and New Mexico, Arizona, but they were also people who came from Denver, from Gilchrist, Platteville, Johnstown, Meade. My dad's band was very popular. They played a large variety. They could play polkas, they could play waltzes, they could play jitterbugs, they could play the cha-cha-cha, the samba, all kinds of those. They were very talented, and I think this museum has some pictures of that, different pictures of that band that they've collected. So my life was spent spending every weekend. He played every Saturday in Greeley. He and his band, he had my uncle, his brother, Uncle Joe, and their family. He had a large family, and my family, it was just my brother and I. So I spent a lot of time with my uncle's family, who was just a couple of houses away from us here. It was a wonderful life. We could dance Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. At times, our fathers were very good about taking us along. Sometimes they would play in Sterling, Fort Morgan, Nebraska. They played regularly on Saturday nights in Greeley and Sunday nights at the Gardenia Hall here. So there's been a lot of music in my life growing up, and my father, he learned to play And my mother, both of them, grew up in La Colonia in Lamar. And so a lot of Fort Lupton people have their roots coming through Lamar. So that was, so that for me, this was a great place to grow up.
It sounds like it. It sounds like you had a lot of fun.
No, that's the growing up years. I graduated from here in 1953. We had wonderful tomato days with the band riding on these large trailers. So the Fort Lupton always knew what our music sounded like, you know, because the Hispanic community always answered or danced to that, but some of the non-Hispanic, you know, they got a chance to hear the band play because they would play in the parades. And so, yes, it was wonderful.
Tell me a little bit about your career here in Fort Lupton.
Well, I started in first grade here in Fort Lupton, so I remember my teachers, Miss McMillan, Miss Adams, Mrs. Gray, and those are just the elementary teachers.
Oh, wow.
There are more than that later. To me, it was a wonderful place to grow up. My uncle moved into Fort Lupton, and of course he had 7 children and several girls. So they, you know, I always had cousins to go to dances with, and we lived next door to each other pretty much. So that was a very wonderful growing up period. My grades were good. I was valedictorian of my class, and I think my parents, I remember one time I was sitting at the table, supper table, and I said something about when I go to college and da-da-da, and my dad, his jaw dropped, and he said, "What makes you think you're going to go to college?" And I said, "Well, I am." So part of that was, of course, because of the wonderful teachers I had. Edith Lutton was the one who would ask me to come in every morning for I don't know how many weeks and recite a poem. And I didn't ask how, why, what. I did what I was told, and I had it memorized and went on to participate in a youth contest in Greeley, Stars of Tomorrow, I think it was called. And I recited this lengthy poem by heart. But Miss Lutton was a wonderful teacher. She was one of those that takes you under your wing. And, you know, she was not married, had never had children, but it's just amazing what a good teacher, you know, how much of an impact they can have on you. So, yeah, and you know, there were many good teachers, but I remember that Miss Lutton was the one that really influenced me. But when my dad says, "What makes you think you're going to college?" and I said, "Because," and I remember it was my high school, Mr. Redding, and I think he's in Billings, Montana. Anyway, he said something about going to college, and all they had to do was say that. And, you know, it became, I don't know that teachers always know how their words can have so much meaning. So it was very easy for me to go to college to become a teacher, because I think they're the most important people there are. I'm going to ruin this interview. Anyway, so anyway, I had got married here. My kids all grew up here. I had 4 girls and 1 boy. They all participated. They all went to these schools here. They all went to college. They just you know, it's a good place to grow up in. representation has changed, pretty drastically. There weren't very many Hispanics. Well, there were several old families, but by no means the number that we have now. I don't know what percentage, but there were not very many of us when I was growing up into school. My whole life has been spent here. From birth on, I had one brother, and he went on to college, became a chemical engineer. All of his children are still around here, this community. Richard Martell Jr. lives here. 2 or 3 of his daughters live in Wyoming. One lives in Denver. So anyway, we haven't gone very far from our roots.
And needless to say, you did attend college.
I did.
That's
I did
awesome.
attend college, and I started teaching in Fort Lupton and never left to go teach anywhere else. I of course, ended as a principal of a brand new school called Twombly School after our Twombly longtime settler. I still remember her teaching us. She was an artist. She was a teacher, and she taught us how to draw. I still remember her very clearly. I don't think she was full-time. They just brought her in at times. But growing up here was, very, what do I want to say? We had, like I said, we had dances at the Gardenia Hall every week, so that part of my life was full. The school part, we attended. I was in a couple of plays in high school, and went on to a couple of plays when I was going to UNC. So it's just kind of gone that way all the way up. My kids have attended college. They've made successes of their lives. It's been a wonderful life. My father would have been proud. I don't think he would, what makes you think you're going to college? That was just so far out of his, thinking. And of course with my mother, there was nothing that we couldn't do. She was a hard worker. She would work at the canning factory here, come home at lunchtime, weed the weeds in her garden when she finished eating, and then she'd go back to work. The canning factory was right there, a couple of blocks from where we lived. And so, it's been an interesting life. I'm very happy to have been born in Fort Lupton.
So what would you say is one of your favorite memories of Fort Lupton?
Oh my goodness. Well, I guess there would be several different categories. My favorite memories were, of course, the dances at the Gardenia, because they would come even from Denver, Johnstown, Milliken, Platteville, Gilchrist. They came from all over to dance. My father could play many different kinds of music. He could play polkas, he could play, waltzes, he played jitterbugs. My uncle was one of his musicians, and my brother eventually became also one of the musicians. And they traveled all over. They would go to Greeley weekly and play over there at the Armory. So there was lots of music in our lives. Dad was always writing music for the rest of the musicians because he was the band leader. And so we had we would go to Lamar to play for their festival, or Brush, or I'm not even sure, we didn't go to Pueblo, but anyway, they traveled. If they could, they traveled. But there were plenty of people here, and in the summertime, the place was packed with people. They say it grew by 2,000 people, and so the Gardenia Hall was packed. And we tried dances. They built the hall and opened up, and nobody was coming. And there they are sitting with this expensive building, brand new building, and a band and no dancers. And so they changed to Sundays. They had to get a special license to play on Sunday nights. And of course there was no alcohol allowed anywhere. And so the dances on Sunday became very, very popular, and they lasted until my father died. So it was had a long history of dances.
Yeah.
They would play in the parades, here in town when we had Tomato Day Parade. So yeah.
So it sounds like music was a good part.
Yes,
Your
music
life.
was a wonderful part. My uncle, of course, and his daughters, and my dad, my brother. So there was lots of music, and yeah.
Rosalie, what are some of your hobbies and what interests you?
Well, I'd have to say reading. I love to read books. I couldn't survive without a library. I just think they're the most important places in the world because they allow you to take books home and read whatever you wish. And I don't know that people recognize what a treasure a library can be. And of course, my mother was, they bought an old farmhouse, moved it in, had to remodel it. Mother would go to the library and check out a book on painting or building cupboards, and then she'd come home and she'd instruct my dad, and he would build our cupboards. And I remember one time she had because it was an old home that they had moved into, and she had one of those washing machines that had legs, and one of the legs went through the floor, and there goes all her hot water and the soap, and she cried, but that's how old things were in those days. And of course my dad had to put the floor in, so he learned how to build the cupboards. But my mother would go check the books out, and she would instruct him. And so between the two of them, they added onto the house extra rooms for my brother, and you know how it is.
Yes.
So.
Now I lost my train of thought. So one thing I know about you is that you're an advocate for the community, for this Hispanic community, as well as just the children. So thank you for all you've contributed
Well,
to the community.
We were very lucky because there was an era where the bilingual bill was signed into law, stating that communities with a certain number of Spanish-speaking students were required to have a bilingual program. So that was an eye-opener because prior to that time, everybody was instructed in English, whether they spoke it or not. So consequently, they never could make as much headway as they could. But when the bilingual bill was passed, I was hired as the state bilingual director, and it was my job to go to all the different schools that had been funded by the state to provide bilingual programs. And that was a wonderful time. I traveled all over, sometimes by myself, down in the San Luis Valley, in the middle of a snowstorm, or whatever it took to go to different school districts in Colorado and make sure that they were complying with the law, the bilingual law. And of course, that was a wonderful opportunity for Hispanics to come out of their quiet lives and participate in the schools and in the fiestas, and to speak the language freely without having to be told, no, you can't speak Spanish in the classroom. I mean, it was a wonderful era. And of course, it was followed by the English Only Act. But I think everybody had learned a lot about how important it was, how much more successful you were if the students understood the language in which it was being taught, or it could be translated for them. I mean, it was, and our program, bilingual program, I said it was not only a program for the Hispanics to learn English, but also a program for the English speakers to learn Spanish. so that they could understand how difficult it was to speak another language or to read in another language. And so we ran the bilingual program, for several years at that time, and then that was all over the state. So that was an exciting time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you, and then if there's anything else you'd like to share, you're welcome to do so. Rosalie, how would you like the community of Fort Lupton to remember you?
Well, I think initially, at least first and foremost, that they would think of me as being someone who really cared about the community. I spent my whole life here. I was born here. And I never left, never moved anywhere else. And I think, I think when I was principal at Twombly for about, I don't know how many years, 20 years, I don't know how many years it was a wonderful opportunity, to, up to that time, our superintendent was enough of a futurist to say, okay, we're going to have a summer school for the migrant children. They applied for funds, and so, education kept going, for the young children who came and with their parents to work in the fields, and there was a place for them to be, to work, to go to school. We hired paras, to help out. So they took full advantage. I have to say that Fort Lupton had its traumas. There was some violent times when the young people that had gone to college and universities decided that we weren't moving fast enough. We weren't. We needed to be more than what we were. So that was a good thing. At the time, people didn't like it. Farmers had their fields burned. It was marches in the street. There was all kinds of trouble. My children remember definitely. I remember we were at home, and Elena, the third daughter, looked out and she said, "Mom, you just went over something in your car." And so my husband and someone else was there, Mr. Rojo. They went out to check, and there was a bundle of dynamite that had been wrapped up, and the ends had been lit, but they were not burning. And I knew that whoever had done it, and we sort of knew who it might have been, because there was a more militant group that wanted things right now. And then there were those of us who said, we have to take our time, we have to work slowly, we have to do this right. And so I knew they wouldn't have hurt us, but it was scary. The CBI came in, they climbed over our roofs wanting to make sure that no other had been. My daughters, I think, had a hard time sometimes, how it is, the kids can, be rude or frightening or want to pick a fight, and my children were not that kind of, although I do have one daughter that she was ready to take on anybody that picked on her family.
I wonder who that is.
She's here. So anyway, I remember sitting in the auditorium, and this group of what you would have called militants marched down, and there were maybe 20 in the group, 17 to 20 in the group, and the auditorium was filled. Every seat was taken with community people who did not like their haystacks being burned, did not like being forced to look at things in a different way, and it took a lot of courage for those militants from CU and the family members that supported them here, for them to walk down that aisle. And there was a head boy, Japanese head boy, and he got up there and he took their part just the same as he would, I think, for any other group. So we always remember Rodney Yukuji. So anyway, it's been a pretty exciting community in its way. You know, we went from my dad carrying floats with Mexican music and Spanish dancers, and you know, that whole Mexican atmosphere and the dances that were regularly done, to you know, maybe a more militant time when you know, things got a little rough. But anyway, I was never frightened. I was never scared. I think some people were, but I knew what people needed to do to get your attention. You know, you didn't do it by going hat in hand and going to a meeting and say, "Would you please?" You know, it didn't work that way. You know, those days, those years were full of lots of that kind of stuff going around the country.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for taking your time.
Oh, thank you.
To do this interview for me and with me.
Yeah.
I personally know you, so I know how awesome you are. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge my 5 children, because I was gone a lot. You know, when I traveled for the state, Maggie was holding down the fort, the youngest one. She and my son were there, and the other girls were already in college, or I don't think anybody was married yet, but they held down the fort. They kept my husband going, taking care of him, and they were a good example of how to be in school. They acted like, you know, young democratic people should. You know, they stated, or they took whatever came and kept on going. I'm sure there was a time when people would take it out on the kids, you know, and one daughter had her jacket thrown out, a brand new jacket, and it was thrown out of the window, and that's not a bad thing, but it was nevertheless kind of a mean thing to do to a brand new jacket. You know, it was just kind of things like that. But this community responded well, you know, and I thought it's too bad that many communities don't respond to citizen complaints until it gets ugly, and then they're ready to work. It shouldn't have to get that far. So, but I think we've come a long ways. We had a Hispanic mayor for 2 terms, 8 years. Joe Martinez is my brother-in-law, and he was a mayor. And he always said the only reason they made me mayor was because they didn't know how to get along, how they were going to manage, you know, the militants that were coming in. So.
Is there anything else you want to share? If not, I think we're finished with
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for being the curator of a true museum that reflects the entire community. You've only been here a short time, and you've already you know, acknowledged that there was more to Fort Lupton than just one segment of people, and that's wonderful. I don't know how the reaction has been. I'm sure it's perhaps been positive. I don't ever remember saying too much about the Japanese community, and there is now, and the Hispanic, there's been some, but I think now it's just on its way to being a true reflector of our community, thanks to you.
Thank you. Absolutely, that is my goal.
Yeah,
to include be inclusive of all members of the community, such as yourself.
Well, I hope that the school the teachers will be encouraged to bring their classes and just to take a view and take pride in what our community has done.
Absolutely. It's in the works.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you so much, Rosalie.
Thank you.